The first glimpse it started on a Thursday evening, one of those nights where the city seemed louder than usual. Cars hissed through the wet streets, neon lights shimmered in puddles, and Haley adjusted her headphones as she stepped off the bus. She had always preferred walking the last few blocks home. It gave her time to breathe after work. But that night, she couldn't shake the strange prickling on the back of her neck, the subtle but persistent feeling that someone was paying too much attention. She brushed it off as paranoia, convincing herself it was nothing more than the shadows of tall buildings looming over her path. Halfway down the block, she noticed him, or at least she thought she did. A tall figure lingered across the street, pacing slowly, almost mirroring her stride. He didn't look threatening at first glance, just an ordinary man in a dark hoodie with his hands stuffed in his pockets. But the way his head tilted slightly toward her, as if every step she took dictated his own, sent a cold wave of unease through her chest. She quickened her pace, the rhythmic tap of her boots echoing faster. But when she glanced again, he was still there, matching her by the time she reached her apartment building. Haley had convinced herself that it was only coincidence. The city was full of people, after all, and not every stranger's presence meant danger. She hurried up the steps, swiped her keycard, and slipped inside, exhaling relief as the lobby's fluorescent lights washed over her. Still, she lingered by the glass doors just long enough to see him stop on the opposite sidewalk. He wasn't watching her directly anymore. His head was turned away, but something about the stillness in his stance made her stomach knot. That night, Haley lay in bed scrolling through her phone, telling herself she was being ridiculous. Stalkers happened to other people, not to her. But sleep came in fragments, broken by the faintest sounds outside, shuffling footsteps in the alley, a car door slamming too close to her window, or maybe just the wind tugging at loose shutters. At one point, she sat up in the darkness, certain she had heard someone whisper her name. The room was empty, of course. When she finally drifted off, her last conscious thought was of the faceless man's silhouette burned into her mind. Morning brought a temporary calm. Sunlight spilled into her apartment, and the unease of the night before felt almost silly in daylight. She went about her routine, coffee in hand, headphones back in place, ready to shake off the memory. But as she stepped outside, locking the door behind her, a folded piece of paper fluttered at her feet. She picked it up, frowning. In thick, uneven handwriting were the words, "I like the way you walk home." The note Haley froze on the steps, staring at the note clutched in her hand. The handwriting was jagged, like someone had scrawled it quickly without caring for neatness. Her heart thudded in her chest, and for a moment she looked around, scanning the street for anyone who might be watching. Commuters bustled past with coffee cups and briefcases. Car horns blared, and the normal rhythm of the city seemed to mock her fear. Whoever left the note had been here recently. The thought made her skin crawl. She crumpled the paper, shoved it deep into her pocket, and tried to convince herself it was some tasteless prank. The entire day, the words wouldn't leave her mind. At her office desk, while her coworkers chatted and laughed, she kept glancing toward the tall windows overlooking the street. Every time a stranger paused on the sidewalk, she imagined it was him, watching, waiting. At lunch, when she slipped out for a quick coffee run, she swore she saw the same dark hoodie across the street, leaning casually against a lamppost. She blinked, and he was gone, swallowed by the crowd. By the time evening came, she was torn between fear and doubt. Was someone really following her, or was she inventing patterns out of coincidence? That night, she took a longer route home, zigzagging through unfamiliar blocks. The cold air stung her face as she walked, but the prickling sensation on her back never faded. She tried to blend in with the crowd, but her nerves betrayed her. Every set of footsteps behind her felt too close, every passing glance too sharp. By the time she reached her building, her legs ached from the hurried pace. She fumbled with her keys, rushed inside, and leaned against her locked door, trembling with relief. But when she turned on the light, her relief shattered. A second note lay on her kitchen counter. She dropped her bag, staring at it in disbelief. The windows were locked, the door had been secure, yet somehow it was there, perfectly placed in the middle of her counter as though waiting for her. With shaking hands, she picked it up. The message was shorter this time, written in the same hurried scrawl. "You shouldn't take detours. I know the way." Her breath hitched. Someone had been inside. She pressed her back against the wall, her mind racing with impossible explanations. The locks hadn't been broken, nothing seemed stolen, but the violation was absolute. For hours, she sat in her living room with every light on, clutching her phone, debating whether to call the police. But what would she tell them? That someone might have left notes? That she thought she saw a man on the street? She feared they would dismiss her as paranoid. At 3 a.m., she finally curled on the couch, too terrified to sleep, every creak of the building amplified in her ears. Somewhere outside, in the restless hum of the city, she was certain he was out there, waiting for her next move. The watcher by morning, Haley's exhaustion was obvious. Dark circles bruised her eyes, and her hands trembled as she poured her coffee. The apartment felt different now, less like a safe space, more like a stage where unseen eyes observed her every move. She left her curtains drawn tight, double-checked the locks, and carried the second note in her pocket like a curse she couldn't shake. Before leaving for work, she snapped photos of the locks, the door, the windows, proof for herself that they were untouched. But even as she pulled the door shut, she couldn't rid herself of the sinking certainty that he would find another way inside. And on her way to the subway, she noticed something new. Taped to a lamppost near her building was a small Polaroid picture. She slowed, staring at it in disbelief. It was a photo of her, blurry but unmistakable. She was walking home, headphones in, her posture tired. The picture was grainy, as if taken from a distance, but her outline was clear enough to make her stomach lurch. Beneath it, scrawled in black ink, were the words, "Beautiful even when you're tired." Her blood turned to ice. She ripped the photo down and stuffed it deep into her bag, her hands shaking so violently she nearly dropped it at work. She tried to confide in her friend Jenna, the only person she trusted enough to share the story with. Jenna's brow furrowed as Haley laid the crumpled notes and the Polaroid on the table between them. "You need to go to the police," Jenna whispered. "This isn't just creepy, it's dangerous." But Haley hesitated. The man hadn't physically hurt her yet. Would the police take her seriously? The thought of explaining everything and being dismissed left her feeling more exposed than before. Still, Jenna's worried expression made her promise. "If something else happens, I'll go." That evening, Haley was hyper-aware of every sound around her. The squeal of subway brakes, the rustle of footsteps behind her, the click of a lighter somewhere down the block. They all felt amplified, directed at her. When she reached her apartment, she paused on the sidewalk, scanning the windows above. That's when she saw it. A flicker of movement on the fourth floor, her floor. The curtain in her living room window swayed slightly, though she knew she had left it drawn tight that morning. Her breath caught in her throat. For a long moment, she just stood there, heart hammering, too afraid to move. Finally, forcing herself forward, she raced up the stairs and burst into her apartment. Every light was off, every surface still. Nothing seemed stolen, nothing seemed moved. But when she reached her bedroom, her stomach dropped. Her pillow had been flipped over, and on top of it lay a single object, another Polaroid. This time, it wasn't a distant street shot. It was her, fast asleep on her couch, her phone still clutched in her hand. The call for help. Haley couldn't stop staring at the Polaroid. Her own sleeping face, captured without her knowledge, made her feel as though her skin was crawling with invisible insects. Every instinct screamed that she wasn't safe, not in her apartment, not even in her own body. She stumbled backward, phone in hand, tears threatening to blur her vision. For the first time, there was no room for doubt. Whoever he was, he had been here, watching her while she was most vulnerable. The apartment, once her sanctuary, had been defiled beyond repair. Her fingers trembled as she dialed Jenna's number. The second her friend answered, Haley's words spilled out in a panicked rush. "He's been inside again, Jenna. He took pictures of me while I was sleeping." Jenna didn't hesitate this time. "Call the police. Right now? I'm coming over." The certainty in her voice was the anchor Haley needed. For the first time since this began, she didn't feel completely alone. She hung up and immediately dialed 911, her voice quaking as she explained the situation to the operator. Within 15 minutes, 2 officers were standing in her apartment, clipboards in hand, scanning the Polaroids and the notes. They took her report seriously. At least, that's what they said. But the officers exchanged subtle glances, their skepticism barely concealed. No signs of forced entry, no fingerprints left behind, no security footage in her building's aging system. To them, it was a vague case of harassment, maybe even a prank. They promised to keep an eye on the area and told her to invest in new locks. When they left, she felt worse than before. The thin veneer of protection peeled away, leaving her exposed to the quiet of her apartment once more. Jenna arrived shortly after, her presence a fragile comfort. She insisted on staying the night, sleeping on the couch while Haley locked herself in the bedroom. But sleep never came. Haley lay awake, staring at the ceiling, every creak of the building sending her into a spiral. At 2 a.m., she heard it, the faint scrape of something outside her door, followed by the soft click of a lock turning. She held her breath, frozen in bed, as Jenna's voice suddenly called out from the living room. "Who's there?" The sound of hurried footsteps pounded down the hall outside, then silence. When morning came, they found another note slipped under the front door. This one was shorter than all the rest, written in that same jagged hand. "The police won't protect you. Only I can." The first encounter, Haley barely recognized herself in the mirror anymore. Pale, exhausted, eyes rimmed red from sleepless nights, she looked like someone hollowed out by fear. Jenna had stayed with her for 2 days, but eventually had to return home. "You can't let him control your life," Jenna said gently, though her voice carried the same unease Haley felt. Haley nodded, but deep down, she knew control was already gone. Every step she took, every breath she drew, felt monitored. Even sunlight didn't comfort her anymore. That evening, she forced herself outside for groceries. The air was sharp, the street lamps buzzing faintly overhead as she carried her bags home. Her nerves twitched at every sound. A cough from an alley, the squeal of a car tire, the steady rhythm of boots on the sidewalk behind her. At first she dismissed it as another passerby, but then the footsteps slowed when she slowed, quickened when she quickened. Her pulse surged. She turned her head slightly, trying to catch a glimpse without being obvious. A tall figure trailed her about 20 feet back. Black hoodie, hands in pockets, head tilted just enough to suggest he was studying her. Her pace broke into a hurried stride, the groceries heavy in her hands. The figure followed, closing the distance inch by inch. She turned abruptly down a side street, hoping to lose him, but the road was quieter, emptier, no crowd to disappear into. That's when she heard it, the deliberate crunch of his boots quickening behind her. Panic exploded in her chest. She dropped one of the bags and broke into a run, the sound of pursuit filling the narrow street. Her lungs burned as she reached the corner, darted around it, and froze that he was there, standing directly in her path, as if he had been waiting. The same faceless figure from nights before, now fully real. His hood shadowed his face, but she could see the pale curve of a smirk beneath it. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The silence between them was heavier than words. Haley staggered backward, heart hammering, and screamed for help. The man took a single step closer, slow and deliberate, before the sound of a car turning onto the street startled him. He glanced over his shoulder, then vanished into the shadows, leaving Haley trembling and gasping for air. When she stumbled into her apartment minutes later, groceries forgotten on the sidewalk, another note was waiting under her door. She picked it up with shaking hands. In bold, uneven scrawl, it read, "Now you've seen me. Don't make me chase you again." Nowhere to hide, Haley barely slept after the encounter. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his smirk, the way he stood so casually in her path, as though the city itself bent to his presence. The note sat on her coffee table, its jagged letters burning into her mind. She had taped her locks, bought a cheap door alarm, even wedged a chair under the handle. None of it made her feel safer. It was like trying to build walls out of paper while the wolf circled outside, waiting. The next day, she skipped work entirely. She couldn't bear the thought of walking the streets, of hearing those footsteps again. Instead, she sat in her darkened apartment, blinds closed tight, listening. Every creak of the floor above, every car horn outside made her flinch. At one point, she swore she heard breathing outside her door, low, steady, patient. She gripped a kitchen knife in her hand, forcing herself to stay silent. Minutes passed. The breathing stopped. When she finally dared to look, another note had been slid beneath the door. Hiding doesn't suit you. I like you better outside. By evening, her paranoia had reached a fever pitch. She couldn't shake the sense that he was watching from somewhere nearby. She checked her phone constantly, scanning her social media accounts. That's when she saw it. An anonymous account had tagged her in a photo. It was of her apartment building, taken from the street below. In the caption were 3 words, "Almost home, Haley." Her stomach dropped. He knew her name. He was watching her online. She deleted the tag, but the damage was done. He wasn't just following her in the streets. He was inside her digital world now, too. She called Jenna again, her voice cracking as she explained what had happened. "You need to get out of there," Jenna urged. "Stay at my place, or a hotel, anywhere. He's playing with you." Haley wanted to agree, but when she looked around her apartment, the only space she knew, leaving felt impossible. What if he followed her there too? What if she led him to Jenna? The stalker had turned the entire world into a trap, and there was nowhere safe left to run. That night, as she sat curled on the couch, knife still clutched in her hand, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number appeared on the screen. Her breath caught as she read it. "Put the knife down. You're not going to need it, not tonight." Scratching at the door, Haley didn't move for a long time after reading the text. She sat on the couch with the knife in her hand, her chest rising and falling in shallow, frantic breaths. Every second dragged like an eternity. Who had sent the message? How did they know what she was doing inside her own apartment? She fought the urge to throw the phone across the room, but clutched it tighter instead, as though breaking it would only sever her last lifeline to the outside world. At around midnight, the first sound came. A faint, deliberate scratch against her front door. Her heart froze. She held her breath, straining to hear. The scratching came again, slow, methodical, as if someone were dragging a fingernail or a key along the wood. She crept toward the door, knife trembling in her hand. Her peephole was covered with a piece of duct tape, something that hadn't been there before. Whoever was outside didn't want her to see. She stumbled backward, panic rising in her throat. The scratching turned to a soft knock. Then another. Then a slow, rhythmic pounding. She pressed her hands over her ears, shaking her head violently, as if she could block it out. Then, silence. She dared to breathe again, but the relief was short-lived. Her phone buzzed in her hand. Another message appeared. "I can hear you breathing." She dropped the phone, her legs nearly buckling beneath her. The apartment suddenly felt smaller, the walls closing in. Every corner seemed alive with threat. She called 911 again, sobbing as she begged for help. The dispatcher assured her officers were on the way, but Haley already knew how this story would go. By the time anyone arrived, he would be gone. He always vanished before anyone else could catch him. Minutes crawled by before headlights finally swept across her window. Red and blue lights flashed outside. She raced to the door, yanking it open for the officers, but the hallway was empty. No one there. Only a fresh note taped to her doorframe, fluttering slightly from the draft. She tore it down with shaking hands. This one was shorter than all the rest. It said, "You're not leaving without me." Flight Haley didn't wait for the officers to come back upstairs. As soon as she read the note, something inside her broke. She could no longer pretend that locks, alarms, or police reports would keep her safe. Her apartment had become a cage, one the stalker controlled at will. She stuffed a small bag with whatever she could grab: clothes, her phone charger, a flashlight, and the stack of notes and Polaroids as proof. Her hands shook so badly, she dropped the knife twice before finally shoving it into her bag too. She crept into the hallway, eyes darting in both directions. It was silent, but the silence was worse than noise. It felt staged, intentional. She forced herself forward, every step echoing in her ears. The elevator was too slow, too vulnerable. She chose the stairwell instead, descending quickly, her heartbeat thundering in her chest. Halfway down, she thought she heard footsteps above her, matching her pace. She stopped cold, clutching the railing, but when she looked up, the landing was empty. Bursting through the lobby doors, she nearly collapsed into the cool night air. The police cars were gone, already responding to another call. The street looked deserted, but Haley couldn't trust it anymore. Every dark window felt like an eye, every alley a mouth waiting to swallow her whole. She started down the block, moving fast, her bag slapping against her hip. She didn't know where she was going. Jenna's, maybe, or a hotel. Anywhere but home. Then came the sound she dreaded most, footsteps behind her. Slow at first, deliberate. She whipped her head around, but the sidewalk stretched empty in both directions. She quickened her pace, heart hammering. The footsteps grew louder, not echoing hers, chasing her. She broke into a run, bag bouncing violently at her side, tears streaming from her eyes as she sprinted through the empty streets. She didn't care where she ended up, as long as it wasn't near him. Finally, gasping and trembling, she stumbled into the bright glow of a 24-hour convenience store. The cashier looked up in surprise as she collapsed against the counter, begging him to call the police. She felt safe for the first time all night, surrounded by light, by people, by the hum of refrigerators and the smell of stale coffee. But when she glanced back through the glass door, her blood froze. Across the street, half hidden in the shadow of a street lamp, the hooded figure stood watching, perfectly still, as if he had followed her every step of the way. No safe haven. Haley clung to the edge of the convenience store counter as the cashier dialed the police. His casual tone, the way he glanced at her with half-amused curiosity, made her stomach twist. To him, she was just another frightened customer in the middle of the night. But she knew better. She risked a glance at the glass doors again. The hooded figure was gone. The street outside stretched empty, as if he had never been there at all. She wanted to believe it was over, but deep down, she knew it wasn't. The police arrived 20 minutes later, taking her statement as she sat at one of the small tables near the back. She showed them the notes, the Polaroids, her phone. They exchanged looks, muttered about escalation, and promised to file a report. One officer even offered to drive her somewhere safe, but Haley refused. If the stalker was following her, she wouldn't risk leading him to Jenna or her family. Instead, she asked to be dropped at a nearby motel, somewhere anonymous. Somewhere temporary. The motel was bleak, a squat building humming with flickering neon. The officer waited until she was inside before driving off. Haley locked the door 3 times, checked the windows, and collapsed on the bed, body trembling with exhaustion. For the first time in days, she thought she might actually sleep. The room was ugly but solid, the kind of place that didn't carry her scent, her memories. Maybe here, she could finally vanish from him. Maybe here, she could breathe. But at 3:17 a.m., her phone buzzed. The sound yanked her out of shallow sleep. She blinked at the screen, her throat tightening. A photo message. Her hands shook violently as she opened it. The image was grainy but unmistakable, the motel room she was in. The angle was from outside the window, the camera pressed against the glass. In the photo, she was lying on the bed, her hair spilled across the pillow, exactly how she was right now. Her pulse skyrocketed. She jerked upright, stumbling toward the curtains, yanking them shut with shaking hands. Before she could catch her breath, another message arrived. This one was just text. You don't need to run. You belong with me. The breaking point. Haley sat frozen on the edge of the motel bed, phone clutched so tightly her knuckles turned white. She could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. The photo on her screen proved what she already knew. There was no running, no hiding. He would always find her. Fear had ruled her for days, but something inside her shifted now. If she couldn't escape him, she would have to end this on her own terms. She scanned the room quickly, her eyes landing on the heavy bedside lamp. She unplugged it, gripping the base in both hands, testing its weight. For the first time since this nightmare began, she felt a flicker of control. She turned off all the lights, plunging the room into darkness, and positioned herself beside the window. Her breathing slowed. Her muscles tensed. She waited. Minutes stretched endlessly, but her instincts told her he was close. The faintest sound broke the silence, the slow slide of the window latch being lifted. Haley's chest tightened as the pane began to creak open. A shadow moved against the curtain, and then the fabric parted slightly. She saw the shape of a hooded head leaning inside. Every nerve in her body screamed to run, but instead she raised the lamp high and swung with every ounce of strength she had. The crash of metal against bone filled the room, followed by a guttural grunt as the figure collapsed halfway through the window. Haley didn't stop. Years of suppressed terror erupted in a storm of survival. She swung again and again, until the figure tumbled backward out of the frame. For a moment, silence reclaimed the night. Then came the sound of hurried footsteps staggering away into the darkness. She stood trembling, chest heaving, lamp still in her bloodied hands. She had no idea if he was gone for good, but for the first time, she hadn't just been prey. She had fought back. When the police arrived minutes later, called again by her frantic screams, they found her shaking but alive. The window bore the evidence: shards of glass on the carpet, a smear of blood on the sill. Whoever he was, he had escaped. But the officers assured her he wouldn't get far, not in that condition. Haley didn't know if she believed them, but as the sun rose over the motel, painting the sky with fragile light, she felt something she hadn't in days: the faint spark of hope. She wasn't free yet, but she had finally taken her life back.